Chapter 108. Kogali returned to the forest after completing her work with the Eastern Empire. It had been a bit rocky here and there, but eventually, they had managed to dissuade Kanzis from hunting Quo and her daughter. Leave the rest to me. I might look like this, but I know my way around politics too, Laplace said, pointing at himself as he and Clayman finished the remaining tasks for her. I am terribly sorry, Kogali-sama. Quo, the nine-headed cryptid, bowed deeply, her fox-like ears drooping low. I have caused you trouble again. Kogali reassured her, there is no need for that. We are birds of the same feather, people who were taken away from our homes and had to build new ones in different places. After that, Kogali brought along a few professional dark elves who were skilled in magic engineering and basic magic science. She knew that building Rimuru's city would require their help as much as hers. After all, it wasn't just the castle that needed complex magic circuits and formulas. Even the main buildings, like the government buildings, manors, and main roads, all had components that required their expertise. How did it go? Rimuru greeted them when they arrived. While Kogali sighed and explained what had happened during her absence, the dark elves with her were guided by Rigard. Rimuru and Kogali chatted as they walked through the city. Kogali couldn't help but notice some new faces among the workforce. Since when did you have the orcs under you? She asked, curious. Rimuru grinned. Since you left. It's a long story, but basically, I saved their kingdom, and now I'm thinking of having the entire orc race work under me. He shrugged casually. Tilda. Kogali watched as several orcs passed by her, carrying loads of lumber and bricks. She imagined if they were part of her nation, with how efficient they worked and how productive they were. She couldn't help but envy Rimuru. How nice, she muttered to herself, her voice almost wistful. Rimuru, noticing her somewhat sullen expression, reached over and ruffled her hair. I'll have a few come to Amarita when this is all over. Her expression brightened, but she quickly regained her composure. Thanks, she said, trying to sound as neutral as possible. The dark elves worked on the complex magic while the dwarves focused on the practicality of the castle. The rest of the monsters were tasked with ensuring everything was feasible. The orcs dove straight into starting the large metal beams for the building's framework and skeleton. The hobgoblins took care of the finer, more detailed work, while the ogres and other evolved monsters processed the materials needed. It had been more than a month since the construction of the capital city had started, and it was officially finished just 2 days ago. While Kaijin could still barely understand how they managed to build such an elaborate and complex city so quickly, he had to admit that the 30,000 orcs had played a huge role in every type of labor, from setting foundations to processing materials. They were even applauded by Benimaru and the other pharaohs, who were very proud of how talented and efficient the orcs had proven to be. Tonight will be the official celebration of the finished construction of the capital city, Seer. Rimuru raised his glass, floating 2 stories high to get a better view and amplify his voice. In front of him stood thousands of monsters, orcs, hobgoblins, dark elves, ogres, Kijins, and pharaohs. Oh, the monsters responded to his voice with a unified cheer, raising their own drinks in salute. While it might seem crowded to have so many monsters in one place, the capital Seer had been designed specifically to accommodate such numbers. In fact, Kaijin had estimated that more than 10 million monsters could live in the city and still have room for a few 100,000 more. Most of the monsters were gathered together, chatting, eating, and drinking with one another. Having worked together for a month, the monsters had grown accustomed to each other's presence. While the hobgoblins still unconsciously lowered their gaze when interacting with the pharaohs, they had become good friends with the orcs and ogres. The Kijins were also very sociable with the other races. Their favorite companions for dining and conversation were the dwarves, even. Having been placed close to each other and worked together during the processing of materials for construction, the 2 races had developed a sense of camaraderie, their team spirit ignited. They drank, danced, ate, laughed, and chatted with one another. Rimuru descended from the air, floating down to his place as the others continued to party. His spot was more organized than the others. While most of the monsters sat on the ground, using pieces of cloth as mats, Rimuru and his companions had a table and chairs. At his table were those who had contributed the most to the feat of building the city in just a month. Kaijin chatted merrily with Kogali and Rigard, while Benimaru praised the orcs' work, recounting stories to their king, Geld. Geld and his son had been invited to the celebration. Though they hadn't physically worked on the construction, they had done a lot behind the scenes to ensure that the absence of 30,000 orcs wasn't an issue. Rimuru himself went to Orbic and invited him as well. Geld had no reason, and no choice, except to accept, so he and his son were now part of the celebration, chatting with Benimaru, the chief of the ogres and leader of the Pharaohs. Thank you for taking care of my brethren, Geld said with a respectful bow. Benimaru waved his hand dismissively. No need for such words. They earned our respect and friendship. He smirked, raising his drink. Geld nodded in acceptance of Benimaru's praise, raising his own glass. The sound of their glasses clinking together marked the moment before they both drank. I heard Orbic is famous for its beer, Benimaru said, a curious gleam in his eyes as he leaned forward slightly, his gaze focused on Geld. Geld, with a proud smile, nodded, yes, we take great pride in our beer. It's been highly praised by both Demon Lord Carrion and Master Rimuru. His chest puffed out a bit as he spoke, clearly delighted to share the compliment. That's true, Rimuru confirmed, joining in the conversation. He was nearby, casually sipping from a glass. You might not have seen it, Benimaru, but they actually brought several hundred barrels of beer to this party. There are. Benimaru raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. He hadn't noticed any barrels, not even when Geld had arrived with his entourage. His gaze swept the area as if expecting the barrels to appear out of nowhere. Ah, Geld grinned and, with a flick of his wrist, summoned a barrel from thin air, the wood materializing with a soft whoosh. I have acquired a special storage skill, called stomach, after Master Rimuru named me. He gave a pleased chuckle before effortlessly pouring a generous amount of beer into 2 glasses. Here, for you both. Benimaru took the glass with a raised eyebrow but didn't hesitate to bring it to his lips. He took a hearty swig, savoring the taste. Oh, this is good, he exclaimed, his eyes lighting up with genuine pleasure. He finished the glass in one smooth gulp and held it out toward Geld for a refill. Geld laughed heartily, refilling Benimaru's glass, his eyes sparkling with amusement. He then took a glass for himself, enjoying the moment. Meanwhile, Kaguli was deep in conversation with Kaijin and Rigard. The dwarves will be returning home tomorrow, she said with a thoughtful expression, turning to the 2 of them. Kaijin nodded, his face reflecting a mix of contentment and mild concern. It's been a month since we were last home. As much as I enjoy staying here and building things with everyone, leaving Dwargo's most competent craftsmen outside its territory, well, it has a lot of downsides for the economy. It has been a pleasure working with you, Kaijin Dono, Rigard said, clapping Kaijin on the shoulder with a friendly grin. He was clearly fond of the dwarf. Kaguli nodded in agreement. If the opportunity arises, I'll definitely visit Dwargo to employ your services, if possible. Her voice was sincere, and she offered Kaijin a warm smile. Kaijin scratched the back of his head, a bit embarrassed by the praise. I don't know if we can be employed outside of Dwargo again. This only happened because Rimuru-sama was the one who hired us, he said with a rueful chuckle. Kaguli waved away his concern, her expression light-hearted. I'll just have Rimuru hire you again, she said confidently. This time, though, the destination will be Amarita. She turned toward Rimuru, who was still chatting with Velgrand. The scorched dragon was casually leaning on his shoulder, her posture relaxed. Rimuru glanced up at Kaguli's words, then raised his glass slightly in her direction, a silent acknowledgement of her statement. The subtle clink of glass echoed between them, and the brief exchange was enough to convey mutual understanding. Outside of the table where everyone was conversing and enjoying the festivities, a certain blonde-haired man stepped out of his cave and found himself in the middle of the lively party. With his powers hidden, he joined in the laughter and drank alongside the others. Kuahahaha, let's continue this party until we drop. His voice boomed, causing those nearby to roar with cheers in response. Yeah, Akijin raised his glass of alcohol. Here, drink some more. He poured more alcohol for the blonde man, smiling broadly. Thank you, Kijin. The blonde man took the glass and gulped it down with a satisfied sigh. He then reached for the meat and other dishes spread out on the mat. The spread was a feast of a variety of foods, each representing the cultures of the different races and their experiences in cooking magical beast meat they had hunted. Thanks to the strength of the Kijins and fair onus, hunting the apex predators of the forest was no challenge. The real difficulty lay in creating a recipe and cooking the meat to perfection, ensuring it was delicious. Kuahahaha, this food is delicious. The blonde man exclaimed, clearly pleased with the feast laid before him. I should leave the cave more often. By the next day, as the sun rose high in the sky, the city streets were littered with the passed-out bodies of monsters. The lingering smell of alcohol and beer still hung in the air, a reminder of the festivities that had ended at dawn when the last of the monsters had finally collapsed, sleeping soundly on the ground. Unlike the monsters, the dwarves had drunk with more moderation and had gotten some proper rest, knowing they would be leaving the next day. Though a few stubborn ones, rubbing their heads in regret, muttered to themselves, feeling the effects of partying too hard as they prepared to leave early in the morning. Rimuru waited by the gate, his arms crossed as he watched the dwarves finish gathering their belongings. His eyes scanned the group, ensuring nothing was left behind. After one final confirmation, he nodded and stepped forward. With a wave of his hand, the gate to Dwargo opened, a swirl of magic pulsing around the entrance. He smiled and extended his hand to Kaijin. Until next time, then. Tel Gazel was extremely satisfied with your work. Kaijin grinned, his eyes twinkling with appreciation as he shook Rimuru's hand firmly. I'll be sure to pass that on, Rimuru-sama. It's been a pleasure. The dwarves, with a few final stretches and groans, exchanged goodbyes. Rigurd stepped forward, placing a hand on Kaijin's shoulder with a proud smile. Kaijin Dono, take care. Kaguli, standing beside him, gave a slight bow, her voice warm but firm. Goodbye, Kaijin. Next time, come visit my territory. I'd love to have you. Benimaru, standing a little to the side, gave Kaijin a nod of respect. On behalf of everyone, know that we appreciate all your hard work, he said, his gaze steady, a sincere look in his eyes. He gave a respectful nod to each of them. Thank you all, he said gruffly, his voice a little rougher than usual. It's been an honor working alongside you. With their final goodbyes exchanged, the dwarves walked through the gate, their hearts filled with pride for the achievements they had made during their time in the Jura forest. While Rimuru continues to leisurely, without care, build his city inside the forest, as is his right as its owner, the surrounding nations and settlements are in a state of confusion and disarray. Another few thousand orcs went into the forest from Orbic, a human soldier announced, as the people seated around the large table pondered and feared the implications. Not only them, but most nations bordering the forest of Jura had increased their security over the past weeks. Originally, the increase in security had been due to the sudden changes in behavior of the goblins near the human towns on the border. Goblin settlements were a common sight in the forest, and while they rarely ventured beyond it and generally kept to themselves, the human towns placed strict guards and fortifications, just in case. However, about a month ago, the goblin settlements near the border began to move. It wasn't just one settlement, every one of them near the border started to move deeper into the forest. From what the humans had gathered from the goblins they had spoken to over the years, the deeper parts of the forest were home to the ogres, the fabled Kijins, and the Pharaohs. Not to mention, the owner of the forest, the silver demon, Rimuru. This is the sign that the demon of the forest has started to make his move. A voice rang out, sending a wave of fear across the room. These words reverberated and echoed throughout the neighboring lands bordering the forest. Fear became their driving force, urging them to seek support. They all concluded that something significant was happening inside the forest, and, despite the risk, sent out spies to gather information. Unfortunately, every single one of those who dared to march deeper into the forest without Rimuru's permission was dealt with by the Pharaohs and Dryads in charge of guarding the western borders. This only amplified their fears, making them believe the demon was hiding something that the humans should not know. Then, another piece of information came that further stressed everyone in the room. Thousands of orcs began to enter the forest, and a few days later, another few thousand entered from Orbic, the known home of the orcs. That is why we are asking for more support from the church. The local lord of the nearest city in the kingdom of Falmouth slammed his hand on the table, frustration evident in his voice. In front of him was an official from the church, someone whose position was almost second only to the king himself. Some might even say his words held more weight than those of the king. The archbishop, bald and composed, shook his head dismissively as the words from the local lord ended. No need to fret, the archbishop reassured them with his usual neutral smile. We've seen no signs of danger after all. If something ever does happen, the usual support we provide will surely be enough. Every nation bordering the forest that had converted to Luminism was receiving constant monthly support from the church. Whether it was the Holy Knights conducting regular patrols or a specified amount of money for the local lords to utilize as needed, the church was actively involved. The local lord gritted his teeth after hearing the archbishop's response. After the communication was cut off, He cursed the archbishop for his greed, not even noticing the hypocrisy of the situation. After all, he had been using the support money to line his own pockets over the years. Many similar incidents were unfolding in other cities across different nations, each pleading for further support from both their governments and the church. Unlike Falmouth, however, these cities were receiving the necessary measures to bolster their security. In fact, some were even willing to take another risk and march into the forest again, desperate to uncover what was truly happening within its depths. They were ready to sacrifice everything, just for the safety and future of their homeland. And that is why we are going into the forest, Fuse said, massaging his temple with a weary hand. His voice was steady, but tinged with a mixture of fear and stress, as his eyes scanned the trio before him. The weight of his words seemed to hang in the air, thick and heavy. "Ha!" the trio shouted in unison, their eyes widening in disbelief. To be continued.